Hi, everyone. I'm Gordon Brickell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify their existing skill set. You can subscribe at filmmakeru.com. Every week, we go live Friday with a film professional to chat and give you a chance to join us. Today, I'm joined with Kelley Dixon, editor for Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, and The Goldfinch, among so many other great projects. Hi, Kelley. Welcome to Filmmaker U Live.
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good, thanks. I guess the first question I'd like to ask you is you got to work with um, you got to work with Sally Menke in early on in your career, and she's such a phenomenal editor. What what did you learn from her that you've taken into your editing process?
I'm gonna really I'm gonna put a real damper on this from the very beginning. I didn't really work with Sully,
Oh, okay.
I worked on the same project. But you're referring to Reservoir Dogs,
Yeah.
and I'm so sorry to do this to you, Gordon. Uh, on your first question, the the interesting thing about Reservoir Dogs was, look, it was a film that was being done very low budget. I was just really kind of starting my career as an assistant editor, and Sally approached me, had an interview with me to be a first assistant editor. The film was being done on film. And most people nowadays don't really know what, a film project, how that works and how labor intensive it is. But back then, first assistant editors in a film room were incredibly knowledgeable and dexterous, and they were really an amazing skill set. And it's like waitering. It's not something you can just walk into and do. So I was very young and had hardly had any experience, but that film couldn't afford a good first assistant. So she approached me, and it was actually the first job that I ever turned down. And I was, incredibly afraid that, oh my God, this is an omen. I've turned the first job down. But there was no way that I was, had the skill set. I knew how to do it, but I'd never done it. And I also knew that it probably involved like 18 to 20-hour days. And the money was just, I was making more as a second assistant editor. So I turned it down. And then later, when they were finishing the film, they approached me again. They needed someone to handle a lot of the opticals, to handle the sequences with the ear, because the MPAA was blocking. They were trying to give it an X review or NC-17 or something like that, and they were trying to get the rating down to R. So there were several cuts of the ear thing. So I was handling the different cuts of the ear and sending it back to the MPAA. I was also handling the negative cut and getting the answer prints taken care of. So I was working in the cutting room by myself. Sally was actually working with Lawrence Bender and producer Lawrence Bender and the director Quentin Tarantino on the mix stage. So, I knew Sally, but I never really worked with her. I was really just there to kind of get the film finished and get it on its way to Sundance. And that was like, I think I worked over Christmas. I think I had a day off, 2 days off for Christmas. And then we were working like the whole way through. So I'm so sorry to to ruin your first question, but I never really worked. She was a very nice woman. But I really didn't work with her, at all. I basically reported in from the cutting room saying, here's what's going on. So
That raises an interesting question for me. And I had talked to David Cronenberg's editor at one point, and he was saying when they were doing The Brood, they were going to get like an X rating or a very high bad rating basically for the film. And I was like, well, what'd you do? And he was like, oh, we just put splices in where they asked for cuts and sent it back. And they were like, oh, great. And they just passed it through. What was like the discussion around that type of like removing stuff and
you know what, I was not privy to any of it. Like I said, I
okay.
wasn't really with the filmmakers. What had happened was they had actually cut different versions of it, and I just had film is rolled up and put on the shelf, And I just had like all these different versions of it. And of course they tried with the best version, and then they, you know, and so it was more like Sally, you know, would say, hey, you know, give us version 3, put version 3 in there. So basically that's pretty much all I did. Unroll the film, threw it in there, drive it over. I mean, it sounds so like just, you know, banal. I apologize. It wasn't this, you know, I don't have the story that's this amazing legendary piece. I was just, you know, there to do it. What I will say, and this is my own opinion, but I will give it, is I think that at that point, I can't remember what year it was. I want to say like 91 or 92 or something. I think that at that point, you know, and this is my opinion, but I feel like there was a little bit of like politicization, especially with independent movies. You know, the MPAA was giving, you know, they were being kind to the big studio movies, but they were being very, very, you know, specific with the smaller independents. I mean, honestly, we've all seen that ear thing. And, you know, I mean, from what I remember, I don't remember the other one, you know, the worst one that didn't get it being much, you know, worse, you know, it was like, you know what I mean? So, but it was that kind of thing where, you know, I think that they were really, really flexing in a lot of ways on independence, but that's just me. And that's my opinion as, you know, 30 years ago. That's my 30 years ago opinion too.
Yeah. No, what's interesting is you cut the Goldfinch recently.
Yeah, I can talk to you about that.
Well, I was going to ask, what was, from an editorial stance, like how different was it? Because you'd been cutting Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and then you shifted into features. So what were some of the big changes that you weren't expecting when you made that shift?
I don't know if I wasn't expecting anything. It's just, and I don't really change, you know, any of my approach or anything like that to cutting at all. You just cut for a longer period of time. You know, the one thing that I thought of when I was, you know, starting to get into, you know, thinking about features and talking to friends of mine that were feature editors, excuse me, I just couldn't figure out what they used all their time for. Like, you know, and in TV, you know, you'll get an 8-day shoot. You have to deliver an editor's cut in 2 more days, and the director gets 4 days. Producer gets, you know, Breaking Bad is like producer takes about a week, and then there's a little bit of time maybe to do some little fine tuning. But you know, the stuff is going through there like a freight train. And with features, you know, I think we shot for like, I want to say 65 days. And then I had 2 weeks to deliver an editor's cut. And then the director gets 10 weeks. And I'm like, what happens with all that time? But I will say that with the Goldfinch, what I really enjoyed, and I find that it sort of has shaped my desires for projects since then, is that my director on the Goldfinch, John Crowley, he was really, really, really very in tune with the narrative. He really, really understood all of the metaphor that was in the book, plus the script. He really understood the characters. He understood their motivations. And what we ended up doing so much of was just having long conversations. Like when he finally came in after shooting, you know, we would spend a lot of time just talking through the scenes. I remember, you know, asking him questions like, you know, about the painting. And I'm like, okay, at this point in the film, does, what's the character, Theo? Does Theo understand what the painting means? He's holding on to this painting, but does he really understand what is his motivation driving that? And, you know, we would talk about that. And I said, well, let me ask you this. Does the audience, like if Theo doesn't know, does the audience know? Are we supposed to know? And I think that lately, my sort of, I don't know, I've sort of gravitated more in editorial to be, you know, more of a specialist as far as like story and narrative, and really understanding where an audience is at any particular time. And if they are in a place, is that where we want them to be? Meaning, you know, whose perspective are we looking at the subject? You know, is it objective? Is it subjective? Is it important that it be objective? Are we ahead of the story or behind the story? Meaning, you know, do the characters know more than we do, or do we know more than them? And is that what we want? You know, is that what the writer wants? You know, there's so many aspects to just the narrative side of it. It's not just, can I make this look cool? And that's definitely the way that I've changed, and my approach has changed, you know, over the years. I mean, when I was a younger editor, it was like, ooh, can I make this look cool? And, you know, now it's like, I want it to look cool, but I also want to, you know, I can manipulate the audience, you know, in ways that I need to, or if it's not working, I can at least analyze it and say, why is it not working? And how do we make this work? So I guess that sort of, you know, is one answer to your question. You know, that has changed in doing that. But I was sort of doing that, you know, later in Better Call Saul. But I have to admit that, you know, with Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, the writing was just so amazingly good that, you know, a lot of those kinds of things were thought of for me. But what I did find was many times it would be not necessarily trying to analyze the narrative, but definitely trying to figure out where the audience was and what perspective, who we wanted the audience to be rooting for at whatever given time. So
now, some editors, when they've worked on films that come from the book, when I ask them this question, they sort of say yes or no. Did you read the book before going into the film, or yeah? And
yes.
what did you take from that you were able to communicate with the director? Was there something that
Well,
stood out
I
for you?
will say that I don't know if this is true, but I actually have a feeling that actually is what helped me get the job. I'll be really try and be really brief about this, but you know, the Goldfinch was a $45 million movie, I think, 45, 50 million.
Mm-hmm.
It was my first feature. I was looking for like a $10 million movie. I was hoping for a 10 million. And I got a call from my agent on a Friday afternoon saying, hey, you know, they want to widen their search for an editor. And I'm like, come on, man, there's no way I'm going to get this job, right? And my agent said, no, I think you might have a shot, you know, and apparently, you know, so, you know, on that Friday, they sent me the script, and I was working another job at the time. And so I immediately went to Audible and ordered the book. I looked the book up on Amazon and saw, usually if there's anything that I'm doing that has a book, I'll look it up to see what the reviews are. Are they, you know, is it a good book? And then I looked and I saw that it was 700 something pages. And I was like, I'm not a fast reader. And usually when they're sending you a script, especially on a Friday, they want to talk to you as soon as possible. So my plan was, okay, I can't read this by Monday, but the Audible, the book on, you know, the digital was like, I think it was 24 hours or something, you know what I mean? It was like, it was short enough that it could be done, right?
Yeah.
So I immediately started listening to it on the way home. I put it in, you know, on the car, and I started listening to it. I kept listening to it. The next morning I had breakfast and then started reading the script. So I, you know, finished the script, and then I kept listening. I definitely finished the book. There's so much, the book is, I mean, for God's sakes, it's a 2-hour movie, but a 700-page book. There's a plethora of stuff in there that you're going to get. The book is actually about a kid who is in a tragic terrorist bombing in a museum, and he loses his mother. And the one thing that I could really connect with is, and the book is not really about the accident, it's more about the manifestation of his guilt and his loss and his, you know, grief and all of that. And the one thing that, you know, in the very beginning of the book, he ends up going to live with another family. And the thing that I could really relate to in that was, I lost my mother, not in a terrorist bombing, but she died of an aneurysm when I was 14. And I could totally relate to what it felt like to now being displaced, move to another place, and how really very lonely that is, but also, and I was with family, so I wasn't as lonely, but it's one of those things where your life totally changes and you want to make a very small footprint wherever you land. You're just trying to like really not be, intrusive and stuff like that. And so I could really relate to, how the character was feeling, what I saw in the script, what I saw in the book, and how his whole internal life was sort of changing and how he was sort of having to, deal with that. And I used that in the interview. I said, well, hell, I'm not going to get this job. So I'm going to be real honest, and I, talked to the director, and it was a Zoom meeting too. It was like I wasn't in person. And I just, explained to him, my take on it and, what I thought. And I just said, they're never going to hire me. So I might as well just be really honest about it. And, 2 days later, I was driving to work and my agent calls. And whenever your agent calls it like in the morning, you know that it's a good thing. So.
Now, we have a question from a viewer, and it's from Vincent. And first he says, awesome work. And he says, can you please talk about how you balance what is scripted with what is actually captured on set? So something scripted becomes more significant when captured, or maybe the script is longer and the scene has to be cut down, or becomes a transitional beat. If you could sort of look into that or discuss that, I guess, with us.
Well, I don't know if I can answer off the cuff, like exactly his question, but I guess my overall note on something like that is what you have is what you have. So you don't, if the script says high angle, whatever, and you don't have that, you just don't have it. So what I try and do is, I am a writer as well. So I really do value the script. And in fact, I've, sometimes have, turned down jobs based on like, this script is not good. And, and who's going to have to fix it when it's, messed up? Me. Yeah. So I know, but here's the thing. It's like, if you run across a piece of property that really speaks to you and you feel it in your heart, and what is it about like that one scene that you read, that, is so evocative or whatever, that's what I try and remember. So no matter what the footage is, I try and remember what is the intent of the script. What was I feeling? What do I hope to feel? And then I take whatever footage I have and try and get that. So I don't know if I've necessarily answered his question or her question. I apologize. But that's what I try and do, because again, what you have is what you have. It's like, like there were several times on the Goldfinch when I called, like it's a very subtextual and internal book. I mean, it's written in first person. Mm-hmm. A lot of the ways that my director, John, shot it was very objective. And so I started asking him for profile shots, profile. And I like profile shots a lot because to me, what they do is they're usually not somebody else's POV. They're usually only there for us as an audience. And what I feel like is it's almost like a chance for us to be almost like on the actor's or the character's shoulder and understanding what's going on internally. Because again, this is nobody's POV usually. And it was really interesting because John Crowley mentioned to me at one point, he said, I'm really intrigued by the way that you use profiles, because he said that he always thought about profiles as being, because you're only seeing half of an actor's face, that you're not getting the full emotion that they can bring. And I was like, oh, that's so not what I feel. I feel that you're getting to be you're getting to understand the internal feeling and working. So it was really pretty interesting because he was not a big fan of shooting them and using them. And then I was like really craving a lot of, places where I could be a little bit more internal in there that, was not there when you're just shooting front shots of everyone.
Is there, to sort of elaborate on Vincent's question, is there a scene in your career where you've got something and you had to remold it or change it drastically, and at the end you were like, wow, I nailed that? Or
Probably. Yes. I mean, that happens a lot. I can't give you an example. I apologize for that. I just can't even think of anything
yeah.
even off the top of my head. But yes, I mean, oh gosh, I wish that I could give you an answer like that. I'd have to think about it and get back to you. I mean, um, gosh, I'm totally drawing a blank. But yes, that happens a lot because, many times, as good intended and as good intentions as they have, sometimes directors just, directors have a really hard job. And I'm always asked a lot, don't you want to direct? I'm like, absolutely not, absolutely not. Because, not only do they have to, figure out what the narrative needs, they have to manage all these personalities and people tweeting about whatever. And, this person doesn't like that person, and lunch is late, and they're shooting, they're taking too long to get this. I mean, there's just so much massive stuff that they have to deal with. And I'm like, I don't envy them at all. I would be one of those directors that would just want to like move people around like a chessboard. I'd probably be good for animation or something.
You'd be like Stanley Kubrick, like, we're gonna do it again, we just do it the same pace, everything's the same. Now, you said you did some writing. Is that script writing or literature?
I like to write and I like to read. So, but I find that it's very soul crushing, especially in this business. There's way too many people who just want to, make your stuff into something else, and they have a lot of power. So I always knew that it wasn't, something that, at my stress level would, and my emotional psychology would take to. But yeah, I've written some scripts. I actually made the sort of the top 100 for Sundance like 3 times, I think 3 years in a row or something, way back in early 2000s. But never made it. It's like, they get like 10,000, then they cut it down to like the top, maybe 100. So I made it to that, but I never made it to the top 15. But I think I like, I like drama, and I like, I'm not much of a thriller writer, but, I have a couple of ideas that I've been, wanting to sort of develop with my old assistant, who's now cutting on Saul. His name is Chris McCaleb. But I find nowadays that there's so much, well, we all just get busy. And there's also so many venues. So it's like, how, what are you writing to? Are you, trying to write something to sell, that's really, really big? Oops, sorry. Are you trying to write something to sell that's really, really big? Or are you trying to like write it kind of small that you can actually do it yourself and maybe make it into like, a YouTube thing that can get bought later? And, we get caught up in the minutia of that kind of thing. And then somebody gets a job, and then it just kind of, oh, we'll deal with it later, But yeah, mostly it was scripts. I wasn't much of a book writer. That is definitely a skill that, and a talent that is much more, I don't know, that's bigger than what I have.
We have a message for you from Yatine. And she says, it's great to hear about your journey, Kelley. You were instrumental in mine in the spring of 1997. You so kindly allowed me to hang out for a few days at Lightworks. At that time, and that was my editing start. I'm now an editor and documentary filmmaker here in LA. We have a common friend in Rupa. Thank you again for all you do.
Who was the common friend?
Rupa.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay, great.
Yatine,
thank you.
Park High.
I'm glad. Congrats.
Now, Melissa's got a question for you, and that is, how far do you push something with a director that doesn't want to, but to do what you're asking, but you believe in this, it's what's best for the story?
That depends on the player. I mean, it totally depends on the player. And these are the kind of questions that, you know, when there's like some kind of panel or something like that, you know, with editors that you admire or something like that, or even, you know, when I'm going to like Edit Fest or something like that, you know, and they have like interviews with these big editors, and a lot of people say, how'd you get your start? And I'm like, I don't care about any of that. I care about questions like this, you know, because those are the ways that you sort of learn to, I feel like those are the most important ways that you sort of learn the real business of this job. You know, it's like, look, if somebody wants somebody who pushes buttons, my assistant does that really well. Hire him, you'll get him much cheaper, you know?
Yeah.
But it's like when you want somebody who knows how to handle the politics, how to, you know, analyze the story, all of those things, it just depends. And what you learn as an assistant being with different, you know, editors who are at that level is you learn how to start to read the room and how to start to read the politics. And so the short answer to that is it depends on the player. The longer answer to that is, well, what is, you know, if you have a good relationship with the director and they trust you and they are in an emotional state that's not stressed, like you know, you certainly can't do it when they've got to shoot something in an hour, or you can't do it when the studio is leaning on them to change something. So it's one of those things that you have to factor in all of those things. You have to factor in your emotional state. You have to factor in, you know, what kind of stature do you have with the production? You know, is the production like in trouble where they're talking about, or maybe you get rumor they're talking about bringing somebody else in to take over for you? You know what I mean? So it just depends. If everything is perfect, you know, and yes, I have a good relationship, and yes, the thing, you know, then yeah, I will try to, I won't fight. You have to like start to, you know, you have to analyze that director's psychology and stuff like that. And you have to like make sure that it's not contentious. Sometimes those things are like, is it, you know, do you make it their idea? You know what I mean? There are all kinds of different ways to go about that. But I find that as I, you know, sort of progress and get, you know, a little bit more and more years under my belt, you know, it's more like on the Goldfinch, I knew the narrative so well, and my director knew the narrative so well. So I could really, you know, go at it in ways that were, you know, honoring the story. And there are definitely times when we disagreed. He's going to win. There's no question that he's going to win. But sometimes that winning means that he took my idea. It's just that I presented it to him where he felt, oh, you know what? Yeah, you know, let's try it. It's, you know, but it's really going to be about whatever he wants to do, you know, you know, unless the studio pushes him. This is his movie. So, and you always have to remember that it's not yours, it's theirs. And hopefully they will trust you enough to be a partner. And I guess one other thing I'd like to say about all of that is it's really led me to start to really look at how I approach the next job, you know, because now I'm way more interested in the approach of a filmmaker when I do something than, you know, like I'm not interested in being just another pair of hands on a 3-editor rotation. That's, you know, it's like I've been very lucky and very fortunate that I've, you know, kept working during the pandemic, and, you know, that I'm in a place where I'm like, look, you know, I get approached all the time. Hey, do you want to do this TV show? Do you want to do, I'm like, no, you know, I want to do something where I'm a partner, you know, and I'm a integral part of the storytelling team, because you know, all editors are. It's just that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that. So now I'm just kind of like, look, if you're just looking for me to like, you know, to say you have Kelley Dixon and, you know, you just want me to slot in, you know, to one of these rotations, I'm like, no, thank you. You know, not looking for that.
Now, I have one last question that we've been asking everyone during the pandemic in these interviews, and that is, everyone is in many cases stuck at home. they and so because of that, they've been watching lots of streaming uh, content. Is there a show or a movie that you caught streaming that you're like, oh, everyone should check out that show or movie?
Up until November, I was really like a news junkie, I guess. And probably till the Georgia runoff, I really wasn't watching anything. I've sort of had to, refined narrative stuff on TV, lately, and I've got a long list on my phone of things that I need to catch up on. So no, I apologize. I can't tell you that there's something. I can't even think of anything that I've really been. I've had to make myself start to watch narrative stuff again, and I'm enjoying it. But I'm also like enjoying things like baking shows and stuff like that. So I hate to say it. I mean, yeah, I'm so sorry. I should have these. You should have sent me these questions earlier. I might have been able to be a better guest for you with that. But yeah, I need to catch up. I'm so far behind. I need to catch up on so many things. This is not new, but I did actually just watch Mindhunter, which I found was really kind of cool, and I enjoyed it. And I hate that gross, like, I don't like that deviant, gross kind of thing, but they don't do that. It's much more about the behavioral science, and I found that really interesting. But that's not new, so it's nobody's going to be like, ooh, It's like,
is there a baking show you'd recommend?
oh, right now I'm watching Nadia Bakes on Netflix. I find that she's really fun, and I'm not a very good cook, but some of her stuff I'm like, oh, I could do that, I could do that.
Well, thank you so much for letting us interview you today.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking me. That's so nice of you.
All right. Have a good